the pride of Hampton County, the great Alex Jones, who just rolled out of bed and joins us here on ITG. Good morning, Mad Dog, Shurburtt, Matt, and AJ. What's up?
How y'all doing? It's good to be back on
Alex,
with you guys.
It's good to see you in the daylight, man. I'm used to seeing you at nighttime. Wow.
I know normally it's 8 or 9 o'clock when we're sitting here talking to each other.
Yeah,
I really thought you were a vampire for a long time.
Well, he is the pride of Hampton County. Who knows? He might moonlight as a vampire at the end of the day. Let's get to let's real quick. I want to get JC on this. I know there's so many people this time of the year, obviously, that are excited about recruiting in the transfer portal and this, that, and the other. So, Alex, you and JC can kind of take this conversation away. Last night we got the news that I don't want to say as expected, right, JC, but certainly it was trending the way of the University of South Carolina for Sumter native Brandon Cisse, the corner transfer from North Carolina State. And according to the reporting by Hale, and I know that you have reported this and mentioned this, and our friends, at a competing website over at at Gamecock Central, those are great guys. We don't have a problem with them at all. Everybody has made a cohesive effort to collectively point out that Shane Beamer and his staff beat Ole Miss to get Brandon Cisse in the boat here. So, Alex, I'm going to let JC lead off with the details of this, and then we'll bring you into the conversation. Give us the goods, my friend.
Sure. Yeah. And I want to tell people that aren't aware, I spoke about it. We got a kind of a new mini podcast that comes out in the mornings called Coffee with Me, and that's it. So you can have your coffee with my mug every morning. It's not live. So it's on YouTube and on, if you're a podcast subscriber, I went through it a little bit, but this part of it, I did not dive into too much, but yeah, I mean, and look, here's things people have to realize. South Carolina for about 15 years, I'll say, because Spur here at the beginning had to kind of get it going. The Gamecocks are batting a high percentage with top talent from this state in football. It's not that way in basketball, but it's that way in football. And it's been that way for a long time. You can ask any coach. It's damn hard to pull kids that grew up in this state away from South Carolina. And part of that, the reason the numbers are so big is because Clemson doesn't really recruit the state. They've gotten some good players from the state. Amari Adams tore up the Navy All-American Bowl, and he's tracking to be very good, and Antonio Williams and all that. But when you look at Clemson's numbers, they're very, very selective in state. I think that's the most fair way to put it. So there's a wide swath of players that the Gamecocks have, through the hard work of three different staffs, they've kind of cornered the market. So, yes, Lane Kiffin's the portal king, and yes, he's going to kind of mess with people on Twitter and put pictures of where he's at. And yes, they've been successful, but it's not like, I mean, just Juice Wells went to Ole Miss because guess why? Because Texas and Tennessee weren't taking him. Otherwise, he would have been in some shade of orange on a playoff team this year. And probably, I think Tennessee may could have used him, but he wasn't going to go play at Texas. And Ole Miss was right there waiting, like Richard Marks. Lane Kiffin, I could see him actually doing that at karaoke, but and I would love it. That's a positive statement. But and they do great in the portal. And yes, Andrew Jones flipped to them, but Andrew Jones is from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. If you've ever made the drive from down there to up here, or up to not all the way here, but in Columbia, the virtual here, it's long. You got to go all the way to down 10 to Mobile, up 85 through Atlanta. It's a haul. And New Orleans to Oxford is just 10 to 59 and right there in Baton Rouge. You go to New Orleans and then pop up. So there's a proximity from home thing there, just like with Brandon Cisse. And, the NIL dollars, he took less, really. If we want to be frank about it, per Hale, to come to South Carolina. It's not that they wouldn't have upped the ante a little bit if they wanted, but that's hypothetical. I'm not saying that. I'm not, because I don't want his agent or whoever to listen and go, oh, well, he can get more money. Go get more money. He wanted to come home, and there's a long line of defensive backs that have come to this school from this state that are in the NFL. And they've been all sorts of different rated guys, everywhere from 2 to 4-star guys. We remember Sheldon Brown. We've had him on this show. Dude was a 2-star guy. And back then you didn't have much film. It's probably was severely overlooked, but he's Louisville. I mean, and he was one of the great ones. Dante Robinson wasn't from the state, 3-star guy out of Athens, Georgia. I mean, the list goes on and on no matter who's been here as far as great defensive back play. It started with Rick Sanford in the late 70s, if we're being honest. First guy that was really drafted. So it's an attractive place for defensive backs to play. Torian Gray's track record is unmatched. I don't know who coaches secondary at Ole Miss or Florida or wherever, but Gray gets guys to the NFL, and that's every play. It's important to every player. I think it's also very important to get players out of Sumter because there's always players in Sumter. If Sumter High doesn't have one, Crestwood or Lakewood will have one. We remember the old Hillcrest Dalzell. Dalzell, shout out Josh Simon. He didn't go to Hillcrest because they closed it. That's where Ray Allen went. They had players back in the day. I mean, Sumter is a gold mine, much like Florence and over toward the whole PD for this program. So you want everybody you can get that's good enough to play here from that area. And he's the prototype guy. Listed 6'0", 182. Looks about 195 when you look at how rocked up he is. He's going to get bigger and stronger. He'll hit you. He can play nickel or corner. I think that's they're going to decide this year, who's going to be the nickel, who's going to be the corner, who's going to be safety. And this guy can help at nickel or corner. They have 3 they like. Some people may not think it's a need, but what if one of those guys gets hurt and you only have 2 that you really trust? This program plays 5 defensive backs at a time most downs. And so you need as many as you can get. And of course, I'll be honest, I haven't heard any fans go, why are we taking him? Nobody's really complained because he's been really good at NC State, surprising. The only question I know I've gotten that's a little negative would be, why didn't you sign him out of high school? And that could be any reason. I guess is camp performance. And in camp, corners and defensive backs in general, you get a lot out of those workouts compared to like a running back that's not in pads or a linebacker. Nick Emanware was a camp evaluation. He probably just didn't camp well, or maybe didn't camp or didn't run a good 40. I mean, all kinds of things, because Torian Gray is very selective. I mean, there's some guys that are highly rated he doesn't touch. But his track record is, I'll take the 2-star and send him in the NFL, or I'll take the 5. Everybody from, Darius Rush to Kendall Fuller, this guy's put in the NFL. So I trust his evaluations more than anybody. I think this is a big pickup for the Gamecocks. It's sweet for the fans and everybody else to beat Ole Miss on a guy, even though the Gamecocks had home field advantage, just because of the hype around the portal and all that. So I think it's a big pickup. I think this guy's going to play a lot of football next year. And the secondary has a huge hole to fill, Alex, with Nikki Menwore gone. But this is just another body in the room and another piece of talent in the room as they move towards patching that hole. The rest of the secondary, I think, looks fine.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head on all of it there. The secondary now, with some of their additions and who they have coming back, it's got a chance to be a strength of this team. You think about it this year with those guys. They were pretty good this year, but a lot of it was, Dylan Stewart, Kyle Kennard, those guys were just getting to the quarterback so quick that they didn't have to cover too much. But now, I mean, next year, those guys, I mean, they're going to have, Judge Collier, Vicari Swain, DQ Smith, and these, Myles Norwood and Brandon Cisse coming in. It's going to be a really, talented secondary and experienced secondary. That's one thing Brandon Cisse brings, is a lot of experience from his time at NC State. And, obviously, I think, as JC mentioned, a little bit bigger maybe than what he's listed at. But, I think he's going to come in with the day in the country and the strength staff may get bigger and stronger. And I think he's got a chance to be really, really good. And one of the bigger things with him is he's got 2 years of eligibility remaining. And so one of the most interesting things with, this secondary, one of the all-season questions is going to be that nickel position. What do they do there? Do they move Kilgore back to safety, which I think is probably the route maybe they end up going. But I could also see the argument for him staying there because he's played so well there. And, They've got a lot of options there, and a lot of options where it's, talented options that all of them could work. And one that I'm kind of intrigued by that could happen would be moving Bakari Swain to that nickel spot. I could see that too, just with his aggressiveness. And at that nickel spot, you got to be able to cover, but you also got to be able to help and run support. And we saw Bakari Swain do that a lot this year. So there's a lot of different options that can go. But, to Brandon Cisse is a really huge pick of a guy who I'd imagine is going to be a 4-star transfer when his ranking comes out. And it's got to be one of the probably one of the higher ranked transfers that South Carolina's landed.
Yeah. Florida signed a bunch of guys this offseason, high school and portal, and they were knocking down the door. Yeah. I didn't know that I didn't think they were much of a threat. Sometimes those kids will go to Florida and be like, I'm in Florida. This is where I want to go. Carlos Dunlap. A little more to that story that we won't get into, but it's two things with this. Number one, folks don't need to forget about these three names. David Boosie.
Yeah.
I think it's Boosie. Played a good bit for a true freshman this year and was good. Surprised me for that, mop up duty, playing time early kind of guy. Jamarii Sandy, we forget about him because he got hurt. He was a first commit, I think, in the 2023 class, redshirted his freshman year and then blows out his knee. He's back. He's a big physical kick. And Hunter is another name. Kelvin Hunter made a hell of a play in the daggone LSU game, and he kind of got hurt. And then also Jalou Solomon. Don't forget any of those guys when we're trying to figure out this nickel puzzle. And I'll add one more thing and turn it over because Matt looks like he's got a question, or turn it over to whoever wants it because I don't have any more like actual questions. But I'll say this: Judge Collier at nickel could also be a thing.
Yeah,
Judge is big. Judge will hit you. Judge is a great athlete because what you want is a guy that can cover but also hold up and run support. And I'll end with this. It frightens me a little bit because the defense really turned, yes, by going to more of a three-man front, but the issues in the secondary in 2023 got solved quickly when they figured out Kilgore's the nickel, Emanware and Smith are the safeties because they were rotating in and out, and we saw Mississippi State and Florida torched them. They figured that out. So what do Clayton White, Torian Gray are going to have to look at it and go, okay, well, what's in, like Lou Holtz, win. What's important now? What's important now? Is it important to, can we live with this guy here? Or, that kind of thing. And I'm not smart enough to figure that out. So I'm looking forward to, and every time I try to figure out what they're going to do in the secondary, I'm wrong. So it's like I could never linebacker in secondary. I'm like, well, he's a Mike, he's a Will, and I'm always wrong. So that's my take on that. Is that there's a lot of options, and Cisse just kind of solidifies that. It gives you just like another guy, and you're like, hey, yeah, they're really deep, and they got a lot of options and things like that.
I'll add too, being a 23 recruit for Brandon Cisse. If you go back to the composite that year, he was the 7th ranked prospect in the state of South Carolina. He was the highest ranked member of the secondary when it came to high school football players that season. Alex, Carolina did land 4 of the top 5 in that cycle. Markey Anderson, Xavier McLeod, Lenore Sellers, and Montague Rames. Of course, 2 of them are not part of the team anymore. Elijah Caldwell was ranked 9th in that 23 class coming out of the Palmetto State. He is no longer enrolled at South Carolina. And Judge Collier was the 17th ranked prospect, being the last one who ended up committing and signing with the Gamecocks. But as part of that 23 class in the secondary, maybe to try to help summarize why Brandon Cisse was not in it, here were the members of the secondary. Maybe they hadn't figured out exactly where they were going to go yet, but it was a big group. Bakari Swain was a part of the 23 class. Jelon Kilgore was a part of the 23 class. Jamarii Sandy was a part of the 23 class. That's 3. Remember, Cameron Upshaw was also signed as part of that class out of Perry, Florida, and he was asked to leave the program after gun charges, and Judge Collier. So that's 5 members of the secondary, Alex, that they took in the 23 class. Brandon Cisse, though, after a couple of years developing, hat tip to NC State. He's turned into a nice player, and he'll be one of those guys now.
Yeah, I think you see that sometimes. Just guys who fly under the radar, and especially some of these in-state guys will just fly under the radar, and they'll go off to some other program, and they'll go and develop like a Brandon Cisse did, and then South Carolina. I'm sure still had a relationship with him from high school recruiting and seeing him at camps and all that. So it worked out for South Carolina that he ended up getting back in the portal, being a in-state guy. South Carolina was able to go and land him, and as JC mentioned, guy that really kind of solidifies a lot of things for that secondary, just that nickel spot. You got to figure it out, but they got a lot of depth there, and Cisse is just going to be another guy for them.
Yeah, and then you tackle Myles Norwood as well. Don't forget about Myles Norwood. And then, the only question I had for Alex and JC here is we see this on message boards a lot and social media, but, Bakari Swain, I think the entire world wants to see him have the ball in his hands more. Do you think that this versatility allows for position flexibility with Swain, or you think he's locked in on the defensive side of the ball right now?
No, they don't do that. Unless you're talking trick plays like they like to throw it to Jordan Birch and Boogie Huntley and Tonka Hemingway, which I'm not being a jerk here. It works a lot of the time. It's worked a lot of the time. But that they just don't. This staff, they don't even cross train on the offensive line. I've heard so many folks out there on Gamecock Twitter or whatever. All this cross training is just hurting everybody on Big Spur too. And I'm like, dude, they didn't cross train. I'm sitting there going, Trevon Ball is probably better than Kamar Bell. I think he was, but guess what? He's at left guard behind Torricelli Simpkins, and that's a different conversation. They didn't cross train anybody. I mean, Tree Babalade was they were smart to redshirt him, but he was never taking Case and Henry's spot because he was at left tackle, and Shivers was behind him, or Shivers. Is it Shivers or Shivers, Alex?
I think
you got the media guy, Shivers. It's Maria Shriver, Jatavia Shivers. Okay, Jatavia Shivers, right? And so that's the deal there. Now, Clint in the chat box, thank you, Clint, mentions punt return, kick return. I think that game could happen. I mean, defensive backs often. Jelon Kilgore returns kicks for this team, for this program, and so that's kind of what getting the ball in his hands, Matt. That I think, as far as him being like Travis Hunter, I mean, I don't know. It would be a surprise to me if the staff did that. They just don't. They very, very few position moves. I mean, it's kind of like if you're
the
here.
The last one I can think of is like Darius Rush going from wide receiver to DB, and now he's in the NFL. But no, I mean, I was more.
Yeah, well, that happened under.
I get that question a lot.
Muschamp moved him over there, though. I mean, so the one this staff did do. Wendell Gregory went from. Is it Wendell or Wendell?
I say Wendell.
I'm good. I got it right for a change. Wendell Gregory went to edge quietly. Nobody even asked about it, but he lined up at edge, and then they quietly changed the roster to edge, which we'll talk a lot about him this spring and summer, because I've got a little theory on that guy. I think he's going to be quite good. Maybe, I mean, this year, who knows, but eventually at edge, I think it's his natural position. But the argument I could have made is probably 2023, when they basically had one receiver and everybody else was hurt. They had Xavier Leggett. It's not hard to play wide receiver when you played it your whole life at the college level. I would assume. I would have rented him last year. There were some folks inside the program that kind of agreed with me. But man, he was so good at corner this year. Maybe that year is what he needed. So who am I to say for sure? But yeah, I think Swain's a big deal. Somebody in the chat box asked, because he signed his Garnet Trust deal yet. It hadn't been announced, but I've checked 16 different times, and Whittle asked him on the record if he's leaving because of that rogue tweet from that Colorado homer. Remember, Colorado was second for him. So that's probably the intelligence there, which is lacking. But he's not. I'm not expecting him to go anywhere. I can circle back on the NIL, but I mean, he's budgeted for and fine and all that. These guys start getting paid now, so with their deals. So I can't imagine that. I can't imagine that he's giving up that money and not signing his deal. So we'll see what happens. But I'm not really worried about anybody going anywhere at this point.
Alex, to shift gears here and get over to hoops, South Carolina's got a matchup tomorrow night that we'll get into in just a minute. But they did fall this weekend to Auburn 66-63. They were up by 6 at halftime and mustered just 23 points. The Tigers defense did clamp down in the second half. Carolina now 0-3 in the league and 10-6 overall, but they gave themselves a chance to win down 2 starters going into the ball game. We asked John this question yesterday. We'll ask you, what did you see from the Fighting Gamecocks?
I think the biggest thing you saw with 2 guys down, you saw players step up. You saw Collin Murray-Boyles look like who we saw a little bit in the non-conference play, but really his freshman year, he was going up against some of the best, forwards in the country, and Janiah Broome and Dylan Cardwell, who, those guys are going to stop a lot of guys this year and go to the NBA. And he flashed all night and was really, really good. And, you just saw some other guys step up too. I think, Nick Pringle had, I know his free throws at the end are kind of overshadowed his performance, but he also played well and for the most part. And then I think, when you just look at how that game went, the biggest thing that stood out was, at the end of the game, you were right there in the last 5 minutes, you didn't score. And, against a team like Auburn, that's going to hurt you. And, it's kind of surprising not scoring 5 minutes that you didn't lose by more than you did, just to be honest, against a team like Auburn. So at that point, credit the defense of South Carolina played. I think that goes to some of the intensity you saw or throughout that game. You saw a little bit of it early on against Alabama, but really the defensive intensity, I thought, really took a step up against Auburn. And that team, they made some big-time three-pointers, and that's what that team's going to do. But, I was really kind of impressed with the intensity they showed in the fight they showed. And I think now the next step is, not letting that game, being that emotional type of loss, letting that affect you. You got 2 road games who I think are winnable games. All these games in the SEC are going to be tough, but 2 games that you can find yourself to go out there and win. And so I think the next step is just not letting that game beat you twice and go see what you can do tomorrow night in Nashville.
I think you made an excellent point there to lump Matt into this conversation too, because while Nick Pringle, the free throws at the end, that stood out, and it should be noted. You have a chance to help your team take the lead and pull a major upset. You'd like to say you got to hit them. And if you ask Nick Pringle, he'll be the first one to tell you, no, I need to hit the free throws. There's no excuse for me missing free throws. Equally as important, if not more, though, is what you just said. And the fact that they couldn't get the ball through the hoop for the last 5 minutes or whatever it was of the ball game. Had they maybe been able to, scrape a couple or get hacked down low, something where they tack on 2 or 3 more points, you're probably talking about one of the biggest upsets in Carolina basketball history. But down the stretch, what was going on there? Was it something that South Carolina wasn't doing earlier in the game on their own? Was it something that Auburn all of a sudden had kind of shifted gears? And give us a synopsis of the last 4 or 5 minutes of the ball game.
Yeah, it just kind of felt like Auburn really locked in defensively and weren't going to let Collin Murray-Boyles be the one that's going to beat him. He had played so well throughout that game, and I think they just kind of made an emphasis on later in the game not letting him get going and make every shot he's going to take tough, and that's what they did. And as you mentioned, it was the wrong time for a drought. We've seen South Carolina this season go through some droughts offensively, and that was just the wrong time for it. But I think a lot of it was just Auburn really locked in defensively, and South Carolina had some opportunities for some shots, and they at the end of the day just couldn't get the ball to go through the hoop.
Well, I think the bigger issue, I shouldn't say that, Alex. I think you're 100% spot on. But one of the other issues is that second half, the refs really weren't blowing the whistle. It wasn't like either team was in a situation to get to the bonus. So when you get into under 2 minutes, under a minute, and you're really counting possessions and you're needing buckets and you're not getting them, then at that point, if the refs aren't going to blow a foul if you drive into the lane, that's a very difficult shot to make because you're probably trying to initiate contact. And when that's not happening, and Collin Murray-Boyles, there were some bad turnovers in the last couple minutes of the game, but when the refs aren't going to give you an opportunity to get to the free throw line, that's difficult. But it was the same way for both teams. Auburn, I don't think got into the bonus until the Gamecocks had to foul a couple times under a minute to even get Auburn to the free throw line. And you're talking about a 1-point game. That stuff matters. I think, Alex, you and I texted about this on the side. Not having Myles Stute in the last couple minutes probably hurt the Gamecocks because he's a guy that, can make a long 3-pointer, can make a jump shot. Jamarii Thomas not being able to attack the rim, whether he gets fouled or not, he's fearless. And that's just the first moment of the entire season where, tight game, 3 minutes left, 4 minutes left, and 2 starters are not in the game.
Dude,
So,
I don't think they're in the game if those two play. I'm just going to be honest. I don't think there's any planet where if Jamarii Thomas is in there playing like he's played, that they're not down by 20. And I'm just
I'll be very frank and honest with you guys. I bet real money on Auburn minus 16.5. So, I didn't have high expectations going into the game.
I mean, I'm not some genius. I'm just saying that Carolina needs to grind it out and play the style of play they play. That gives them the best chance to win. You're not going to win playing like Jamarii Thomas plays or has played. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say he can come back and still contribute to this team in a different way. But your point guard trying to go a million miles an hour when you're not going to ever be as athletic and good athletically as all 15 teams you're playing this year. That's not how last year's team won 26 games, and that's not how this year's team is going to escape the basement in the league. And then Stute is great. I mean, I half agree there because you never know when he's going to nail a big-time jumper. But, I mean, frankly, in that game, if they were going to stay in it, you don't need like a 1 for 11. I'd rather Arden Conyers take the shots. Just being real. I'm not trying to be critical.
I get that.
I just saw so much improvement with those guys not there. As limited as this team is, the style of play made it finally looked like a Lamont Paris team. I'll shut up.
The thing that Stute would have
there. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I was going to say the thing that Stute would have helped bring there was obviously his threat of a 3-pointer because, we've seen when he gets on, he can get on. And so I think having him on the court at that time would have helped maybe, spread the defense out a little bit instead of them where Auburn was just locking down the paint, but because I think, when you look at it, South Carolina was 4-16, I think, from 3, I think. And I think you could bank on Stute at least making 1 or 2 potentially in that game. And Arden Conyers made some clutch 3s down the stretch. But I think the biggest thing Stute would have brought was just to help maybe spread that defense out a little bit and open things up in the paint.
I agree with you there because you got to go out and guard him. They were packing it in. So, I stand corrected on that, Matt. And I wasn't coming after you, Matt. I'm just –
I know.
I just feel very strongly that that the style was actually – more conducive to competing and winning.
Well, I think you're right, JC. I know JB, we probably got to hit a break here in a minute, but one thing I will say is, JB and Phil and JC, and we talked about this in the preseason. I thought that Jacoby Wright had the opportunity to be the straw that stirs the drink like Talon was. Very measured, very reserved, very confident, very understanding, almost slow with the basketball, but seeing things. And, maybe that happened. I think Mike had a good point yesterday where you kind of had 3 people trying to spearhead the offense before the injuries with Collin Murray-Boyles, Jamarii Thomas, and then Jacoby Wright. And having Jacoby kind of initiate things and get into sets that he's been there a long time. He's been there his 3rd year with Lamont Paris. He knows what Lamont wants. And maybe that helped. I can tell you one thing that helped, Auburn going 6 for 12 from the free throw line. That really helped because there were multiple times that they missed back-to-back free throws or they missed the front end of something or, whatever. And that's how the Gamecocks, I'll say this and I'll be done. The most encouraging thing that I saw in the Auburn basketball game was the Gamecocks getting down by 9 and not losing it. Just not absolutely letting that balloon to 20. They got down by 9. They went on a 14-2, 16-4 run. They had an 8-point lead at one point of the game. First time I've seen that in quality basketball for South Carolina this year. So that encouraged me. At the end of the game, is Morris Ugusuk, used to taking a 3-pointer with, limited seconds left on the shot clock in a big moment? Probably not. Do you want Morris shooting that 3 from 40 feet to end the game? Probably not. But, they'll learn from it. And I was just encouraged by it.
You got to go. You play the percentages there. Your top 2 3-point shooters are named Morris Ugusuk. I apologize. Morris Ugusuk and Jamarii Thomas. And Jamarii Thomas wasn't in the ball game. So at the end of the day, one of those guys most likely is going to get that shot because they're the 2 that hit them the most consistently for South Carolina. Yeah, they're going to be searching for answers with a thin bench moving forward. On the ball game tomorrow night, Alex, again, crucially important if South Carolina wants to try to enter any chat pertaining to the postseason in any form. These next couple at Vanderbilt, at Oklahoma, the Commodores, it's a 6:00 tip tomorrow night Eastern in Nashville. The Commodores enter at 1 and 2. They have lost back-to-back ball games to Mississippi State. They share that loss with Carolina, and they went up to Missouri and were taken down up there 75-66. They did open the league, though, with an 80-72 victory in Baton Rouge. What do you know about Vanderbilt and this matchup for the Gamecocks?
I think one of the more interesting things about Vanderbilt is on their roster, every player is listed as a point guard, which I think is pretty interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think the one thing that I'm watching for in this game is down low in the post. Vanderbilt maybe is a little bit undersized. I think their tallest is a 6'9" guy, and they're sitting around that 6'7", 6'8" range. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch Murray-Boyles and Nick Pringle to see how they battle down there. I think they may have a little bit of an advantage, and it's never easy in Memorial Gym to win. I think they're going to need some guys to go and make some clutch shots. You're going to need Jacoby Wright to have some clutch shots, because Vanderbilt's improved this year under Mark Byington in his first year. I think he's done a pretty good job so far, and they got a pretty talented bunch. They brought in a bunch of transfers this year. I think the majority of their teams are transfers.
Everybody,
I think it was mainly everybody.
Or freshmen.
They got a kid from Clover, South Carolina named MJ Morris, I think, that's averaging about 8 points a game for them. So they have a Palmetto State prospect as well. He's got some roots because he was at college in Charleston. Mark Byington does.
Mm-hmm.
He won 31 games at the most hellacious little school in the mountains that exist. I'm sorry, App State. You don't have that title anymore, and that's James Madison University.
The last time they took the trip to Nashville, it was an overtime heartbreaker in 2023, 84-79. The trip prior to that, Carolina did squeak out a 72-70 victory up there. So the last couple of ball games have been really, really close. We'll see if Collin Murray-Boyles can have another big one, and Nick Pringle. Those are the guys. Those are the guys. You got to feed the beast, man. Run that offense to through your front court and see what happens. And maybe what happens tomorrow night is a victory. Alex, any do you want to tease anything? What's coming up on the Big Spur? You got like a big splashy headline that's going to hit or something like that? Are you going to be what are you writing about? Like the swimming and diving team, or uneven bricks on the horseshoe that we can land at Tanner's feet before he gets out of town? What is it?
So actually was looking this morning at the 24/7 Sports team rankings for transfers, and I think South Carolina's at 16 or so, somewhere around there without Braden Cisse having ranked. And before Braden Cisse was ranked, South Carolina's average ranking was higher than I think maybe 6 or 7 teams ahead of them. So I think, when you look at the transfer rankings, South Carolina is from a ratings wise, looks like it's got a pretty good class. And, Cisse should be ranked here pretty soon. So we'll have something out on that to see where South Carolina stands in the team rankings wise, which is not the end all be all because of, it's just with transfer rankings, but I just thought that was interesting that they're pretty high up there.
Well, there's two ways to look at that. One is the class and the ranking, because class size goes into that. The other, though, is the average per player, the average rating per player. Yeah. If that rating is, I know JC's mentioned it in the past, but if that rating is somewhat decent and reflective of whom they are signing, really at the end of the day, it's not about anymore how many players are you signing in the portal. It's, are you addressing your needs with quality players in the portal? And that's really what it comes down to, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they've done that. They've added some guys on the offensive line they needed. It's going to be interesting to see what they do spring portal wise, and maybe they find a receiver or a defensive tackle that's the right fit. I absolutely see them adding that, but I think South Carolina's done a pretty good job here of filling some needs that they had here in the offseason.
Alex, you do a wonderful job, and not only are the Gamecock fans happy with you, but the Hampton County sure is proud of you, my man. That's why you're the pride of Hampton County. Good to see you, and we'll see you next week.
See y'all soon. Good to always be with y'all.
See you, brother.
Yeah.